success in business is not a destination. It is the journey. And if you're going to, sacrifice something for 3 or 4 or 5 years to achieve this success, you've probably failed, because the journey really is where the success is.
Welcome to CEOs on Video, the show to help you go from being the head of your business to the face and voice of your brand. If you're a CEO, a business owner, an entrepreneur who is involved in bringing a new business for your company, then you need to be putting out content. You are the subject matter expert in your business, and there's no one who can market it better than you can. In this show, I interview experts who are killing it online, using video, using digital media to grow their business, and we're going to show you how you can be doing the same.
Gwen Bortner is a no-nonsense operational strategist and business advisor with an intuitive coaching mindset. She helps visionary female entrepreneurs achieve their most ambitious goals without the stress and overwhelm of trying to do it all on their own. Her approach comes from the belief that personal and professional success looks different for everyone, and most business owners waste time and energy trying to conform to outside expectations and definitions of success. From finance to IT and business operations to academia, Gwen has seen cookie-cutter strategy put organizations on the fast track to frustration, burnout, and eventually failure. Problem solving is her zone of genius, and Gwen can quickly discern the root cause of issues, simplify systems and processes, and then create the most direct path to any given solution. Please enjoy my conversation with Gwen Bortner. So, Gwen, first of all, thank you so much for coming on this episode. To jump right into it, I saw something really interesting on your website before this, when I was just kind of refreshing a little bit on your key areas of focus. And you said something really interesting of everyone thinks that their first hire should be a VA. That's wrong. Can you just break that down a little bit for me? I think that's a natural area people go to, and I want to hear why you're against that.
Yeah. So, thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited. Every time you and I've had a conversation, it's always been really, a rich conversation. So I'm excited to be able to do this and share it with others. Um, it was one of those kind of aha moments that I had after working with, a number of my clients, that kind of the common wisdom, I'll say, that's out there, and you hear so many people say is, the very first thing you need to do is get a bunch of your low-level admin off your plate, hire a VA, make that happen, right? Um, and that can be right, but it's kind of rare, because for that to go really well, other things need to be in place first. And most of the time, when you're at the point where you're just in this kind of overwhelmed, huge kind of space of like, I've got so much to do and I don't know how to get it done. People will hire a VA, but they don't have all of the baseline pieces in place to be able to make that VA successful. So the VA is always reaching back out to them and saying, but what do you want to do about this? And how do you want to handle that? And, and the thoughts that start going through their mind is like, I could have just done this faster. And now I'm paying someone and it's still taking the same amount of time. So now I'm losing money paying for someone who's doing work that I could have gotten done in the same amount of time that I'm still spending. It just becomes this, cycle. And often this will go, it's like, I must have hired the wrong VA. And so they let that VA go, and then they hire another VA, and a similar kind of thing happens. And occasionally they'll get lucky. So let me just say that that's one of the things that will happen, is sometimes they'll get lucky and they'll have someone who actually is beyond what I consider when we're talking about a VA, and is able to help them make progress. But the reason it's problematic is they typically are looking to hire someone at a really, really low rate. And someone at a really low rate needs to have all of the processes documented. You need to have all of that information really clearly defined. You need to have a decision tree for certain types of things because they need to be able to think like you want them to think. And unless they're in your brain, which most of the time they're not able to do that. And so there's this huge amount of documentation and prep that needs to happen before a VA can be really successful. And folks are like, well, I just want to hire a VA to do that. It's like, that's not where they're at. They want to be able to follow a set of processes, check off the boxes, do the steps, do the things. And when you're there, then hiring a VA is super valuable. But hiring someone, from the Philippines or, at a low cost, that's not going to be their skill set because that's why they're not charging 50 or $60 an hour. they're,
Right.
they're charging 15, 20, $25 an hour. And so that becomes where the challenge really, really falls. And so hiring that VA usually is a waste of money and a waste of time and energy and cycles until you can put that other piece in place. But to put that other piece in place, you usually need to hire someone at a much higher level to help you figure out what are those pieces and or get that documentation in place, and go through those processes. And that's scary because, like I said, that's not a 20, 25, 15, whatever dollar an hour job. That's going to be a 50, 60, $75 an hour job.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I was wondering if that was where you were going to go with it, because I'll admit I did a little bit of that when I hired my first person. It was for not a VA but an editor, so a very
Mhm.
similar process of
So, see, a
finding
similar kind of
remote
role.
help.
Yeah.
I'm too busy. I need help, and I know, like, if I get much further, I'm not going to be able to do everything, so I need to buy some time back. And the first 2 or 3 months, I really didn't save any time. I actually ended up doing things twice more often than not,
Hmm.
because I would have to watch from afar, and I would have to go back through and make corrections and teach how we do things. And it really didn't start to pay off until several months later, which at that point, I think most people would have just found a new editor or, a new VA, and they would have had to start all over. And the point is not necessarily that they didn't know what they were doing, is you didn't know what you needed from them. So, and they're just guessing. They don't know
Right.
what's in your
Exactly.
brain. And when we reach the threshold of I'm too busy to do this, I need someone to step in, you no longer have the bandwidth to build the tools and systems and process to get them. So there's some sweet spot in hiring of a little bit before you need them, so you can have the window where they can grow into it, and expect that 90 days before they're actually going to be really competent, if you're lucky, if it was even a good hire. But
And
also, you need to have the pieces in place.
yeah, and so one of the things that I recommended to some of my clients that's worked really well, which is a surprising option, is that the first person they hire is actually someone who can do the client work that they're getting paid to do. And this seems counterintuitive because it's the whole, but I have to pay them a lot more money. I'm just going to pick random dollar amounts.
Sure.
Could be anything, right? But so if I'm charging $200 an hour, I may have to pay someone $100 an hour
Mhm.
or 150 even dollars an hour. And you're like, well, why would I pay someone that when I could be getting all of that money, right? I mean, that's our
Right.
first thought, but it's a concept that I've heard Mike Michalowicz talk about. From he wrote Profit First. That is, but would you rather have $50 and have your hour, right? So that's really what happens is if you're able to bring someone in who can actually do the client delivery work, you're not paying them unless you're getting paid, right? So it's not just money out the door. It's not expense money that you're having to pay regardless. You're only paying them when you're getting paid. So that's, so it's a positive cash flow kind of thing. Your personal cash flow has gone down significantly, but you've regained time. And so if you're truly in that overwhelm, where you weren't able to anticipate enough, which usually is the case. Most of us are not very good. I mean, I'm not even good. I do this for a living, and I coach people on it, and I'm still really bad about anticipating when is the right time. I get a little too far in, and it's like, oh, should have done this earlier, right? So hiring that expert consultant to come in and support your clients in the way that you want to be supported, you don't need to spend a whole lot of time with them, because you're bringing them in because they've got
Yeah.
skills. They've got a lot of what you need, but you're getting some of your time back. And then with that time is where you need to do what you were talking about, right? Is starting to figure out, what do I need to get out of my brain and onto, paper or into a Google Doc, or, whatever
Right.
mechanism that you're going to be able to transfer that information, so that then you can bring in a person or two at a much lower level. They will be able to get up to speed faster. And now we're regaining even more of our time back, which now we can go back and sell our time again back at the $200 an hour. And here we are. Right. So it's somewhat counterintuitive, because people are like, but that's my money.
Right.
I don't want to give that up. But the advantage is, it's not an expense in the same way of just hiring a VA to, in your case, do video editing. Right.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. One, I think I actually started, that's why I brought in an editor rather than I need an admin to help manage. I don't know, as a solopreneur, I don't know how much admin you could be really juggling, maybe with bookkeeping or, some of the just kind of monotonous stuff. But having someone that over time I knew was going to be able to take over 2, 3, 4 client projects, and knowing what we're billing those out, it becomes like the math begins to work out, and
Very
you
quickly.
figure out every business is going to be different, but figuring out what your range of margin needs to be for each new person in that sort of role, then you can start to see, like, well, now my training hours and my SOP hours and my process hours are going to multiply, because now if I can do it with one, I can do it with 3 or 5 or 10, and
Yep.
you start to have the process. One thing I wish I'd known before I did this for the first time, and I just didn't realize this, I didn't know the right questions to ask. I didn't know what I didn't know, so I didn't know how to prepare them to tell them what I expected, or what what our requirements were, or even how to necessarily do some of the work, because it was just so obvious to me. I would look at a project and say, well, just do it, and then they would come back with something completely not appropriate for that project, and I would be frustrated. But the problem was I didn't give them any instruction to really know what to do. And I think this is a common problem in hiring for really any role.
And it's the number one problem, a smaller entrepreneur, early, what I call early stage entrepreneur, where you're in, you and maybe a person or possibly two, but really it's for all practical purposes a solopreneurship. It's a huge problem, because often the thing that we've gotten into doing, we do because we do it so instinctively, and because we do it so instinctively, we don't understand, like you said, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, I've been doing this for years and still have revelations about this, and was talking to one of my coaches, and then debriefing with my second in command, and she always has some really great insights for me, because of course she sees me from the outside as opposed to me seeing me from, my inside, right? And she was giving me some feedback, and it was like, I'm not sure I get it. So we like movies. So she gave me a movie analogy of the Matrix. Of, she said, when you've watched the green screen long enough, you don't see all the numbers and characters, from the Matrix. Says you see the woman in the red dress, know what the image is. And she said, that's the way you are with process. You see what the steps are, even when no one else can see them. And even if you don't know what all of them are, you know enough of them that you know that you'll be able to figure out the rest of them. And she says, I see you do it all the time. And I said, but can everybody? And she's like, no. And I laughed and I said, so, going back to even an older movie, probably even before you were born, is I see dead people. I see
Yeah.
process, right? And she said, yeah, that's exactly it. You see process. You understand that there are steps, and you have a way of being able to see not only what the steps are, but what the most direct route is and what is most appropriate for the person that you're working with. Because for me, that's one of my big, huge cultural things for me is context matters. Your context matters.
Right.
The answer I'm going to give you is going to be very, very different than the answer I'm going to give someone else who, for all practical purposes, is offering the exact same service that you are.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to fall into the thinking is obvious for everybody. When you're an owner, when you've been in it for too long, you're too close to it, and you assume that people know what you know, even the basic stuff. Just the way of arriving at a solution or a conclusion, you think like, oh, I'll just show them what I see and they'll get it. And the reality is they probably don't. And I think it's almost more dangerous when you get lucky on that 1 in 100 hire
Yes.
and they do get it.
Yes.
Where maybe they worked in a similar industry and they're like, oh yeah, I know what they mean. And you think, aha, like I was right. They can, this will be how it is every time.
Yes.
And their second hire seems like they have no clue what's going on, and they've developed none of the tools or the means of communicating it to a way that someone brand new could understand it.
That is exactly true, and that is a huge risk because there are some folks whose brain works like your brain. There always will be, but like you said, it's a random chance when those two connect, and when they do, if you don't realize that was truly a unicorn kind of marriage, then you get frustrated with everybody else because they're like, well, they're just not good. It's like, no, they're actually probably really good. You're just not able to give them what they need.
Right. Yeah, it's not their fault.
Right.
And it creates it's a point of weakness because now so much hinges on that person of if they leave for another job, if they are out sick or injured, the whole operation starts to crumble. An unfortunate number of small businesses have that. They have the office all-star where if they're not around, everything just collapses. And yes, it is great to have an A player, to have someone who can, really propel things forward, but it's dangerous.
It is, and I believe that every office should have all A players. I mean, I really do. But understanding what their strengths and their weaknesses are, if we want to use a baseball, analogy, not everybody is a pitcher, right?
Right.
Right. Someone is a first baseman, and someone is a third baseman, and someone is a fielder, and someone is a catcher. And the person who's a really good catcher most likely could pitch the ball, but they're not going to do it anywhere at the same level that the person who's a pitcher is doing, right? So,
Yeah.
everyone probably could play everyone else's position, but they're not going to play it as well given certain characteristics. And knowing that sometimes, one of the things that I deal with a lot with my clients is that a person that they brought in early in the business is no longer the right person to still be in the business. And because the business is transformed, and sometimes that person isn't able to transform with them, or those skills just are no longer needed at where the business is now. And I see lots of resistance of like, oh, I don't want to let them go. And it's like, it's not about them not being a good person, because they are. They're a lovely person. They're a great person. But release them out into the workforce so that someone else who needs them in that same way you needed them at that stage now has access to them. Because keeping them is holding you back, but it's also holding them back. right? Because they're no longer able to perform. And I see that as another, piece of this puzzle that people really struggle with is the first person you brought on may not be someone who stays with you for the entire journey. Whether it's a 5-year journey or a 20-year journey, they may not stay with you the whole time, and it may not be your best fit.
That's a hard one to swallow because there comes a
It's a loyalty issue, right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's the loyalty aspect, but also having the transparency and the high level understanding of where people fit within kind of the day to day and the big picture that we were talking a little bit before, where operations just doesn't have a great way to objectively measure performance. It's not like marketing or sales where you have clear KPIs. You can understand if something is working or not.
right.
Operations, it's muddier. Not everyone's in a billable role. Not everyone is directly contributing to growth, but they are in support roles. And it's not always super clear.
Hey there, if you are hearing this and you think a podcast might be right for your business, then you're in luck. One of the services that we do over at Evoke Media Labs, which is the sponsor of this episode, is create podcasts for busy entrepreneurs like yourself. Having a podcast is an excellent way to showcase your thought leadership, your industry expertise, and build connections within your industry so that you can provide something valuable to your audience in a non-salesy way. Nobody wants to download an ebook in exchange for an email anymore. Having a podcast lets you nurture and build trust with your audience and lets them get to know you a little bit before and up until they're ready to actually have a conversation with you. So if that sounds like something that you want in your business, shoot us a message and we'll see if we're the right fit for you to help you launch and grow your show. All right, back to the episode.
So there's a couple things. One of the things that I created early on is what I call my gears assessment. It's a free assessment, and we can make that available to your listeners. But I will say most people when they first do it say, "Yeah, I'm not sure it was that useful." But it's about using it consistently over time. So be prepared. It's not what I'm going to call a light document, but it's not overly complex either. It's like 5 pages. But the gears assessment I use with my clients during our quarterly planning sessions. I offer quarterly planning that's a group session, obviously every quarter. And one of the stages of it is doing the gears assessment because it is an assessment, but it's a completely subjective assessment. And that's one of the things I make really. It's not as cut and dry as we made 6 sales or we made 10 sales, right?
Right.
It's a much more subjective assessment, but it looks at what I consider the 5 kind of broad areas of operations, and the gears is an acronym, right? So G stands for goods and services, looking at your product mix, what you're offering, what's going on there, your pricing, all the things that have to do with kind of just the thing that you're offering, not as the deliverable itself, but just in that broad behind the scenes piece, like you said, the operations kind of side of the gears of the goods and services. E is about effectiveness. Are we using time effectively? Are we being effective in our leadership as we start to bring on people? Because that's often a big transition that has to happen as well. A is about accountability. So are we creating an environment where people are accountable for what they're doing, but also accountability is about, are we being accountable as the owner? Because my definition of accountability is you have to be accountable to somebody else. And when we're at the top of the company, when we're when we're the owner, it's like, so who are we accountable to, right? And a lot of us say, oh, I'm very self accountable, and it's like, yeah, maybe. I bet not as much as you think you are. We're very accountable about doing the stuff that we like. I'm not
Right.
always as accountable doing the stuff that we don't like. So R is about resources, which is looking at people, money, time, technology. Are we using our resources as effectively as possible? And then S is systems. Are systems in place that are helping us manage it? And so the process is you give a score from 1 to 4. There's 5 questions in each of those areas, and so you do a 1 to 4. So a perfect score is 20. And the idea is, as you're looking at it, based on where you want to be, how do you feel? That's why it's subjective, right? And so in a particular area, I may have a 13, which is like, "Oh, that's not that great. I've got room for improvement there." Right. Another area I might be at 17 or 18. Yeah, that's a pretty good score. That's probably not something I need to address. But it allows us to focus on where I want to focus right now, because this is
Yeah.
the area that has the most need. But I've been reminding my folks who've been doing this now for a couple of years, as they're doing their quarterly review, sometimes all of your scores may go down because your bar of acceptance has actually raised, right? What is good enough is now not
Right.
good enough anymore, right? And so you may have all it's got kind of everything up to, 16, 17, 18, and then the next time it's like, yeah, everything's back down to like a 13. It's like, yeah, you've raised your own expectation. And so that's why I say it's subjective. It's not objective, but it allows you to be thinking about all of these aspects of the behind the scenes part of your business that almost nobody ever talks about.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point because you're absolutely right. When you gain proficiency in an area, it's natural that your level of acceptance for performance or what you will tolerate will begin to become more challenging. Like you'll set a higher bar for yourself.
Yep.
And you make a really good point on your website where you talk about how success is different for everyone. And having a really clear idea of what that actually means for you, because when you start developing areas of a business, if you're not intentional about it, you can get pulled into the trap of just thinking more, bigger, more sales, more, bigger team, just keep doing more of everything. And if that's not what you want, then you're going to be frustrated when you get it because it wasn't what you were actually after. So how do you approach setting like a relative success, or how do you approach that with your clients of making sure you build the right thing?
So it's a question that I'm constantly asking, and it is something that comes up during my quarterly planning sessions with folks as well, is to say, what do you really want? What are you actually trying to achieve? Not what society is going to judge you as success. Having a nice solid mid five-figure business, but that you're only working on 5 or 10 hours a week and is able to pay for a nice vacation for the family, may be success for you, right? But someone else would be saying like, well, but that doesn't even like pay your mortgage, or it does, you can't live on
Right.
that. Well, that may not be what you need, right? That may not be an objective. Um, for someone else, it could be completely different. And that to me is back to where the context matters, because knowing what that objective is then changes how the operations should look. One of the phrases I use all the time, that occurred to me several years ago when I was doing my own quarterly planning, is every business works exactly as it was designed, but very few businesses were designed with intention. And so if we start designing our business with the intention to have all of the things that we want, whatever that looks like, right? That could be more money, it could be more time, it could be a bigger organization, it could be a business that runs completely without me. It, all of those things are possible, and none of them are the right answer, and none of them are the wrong answer. It depends on who you are.
Right. I actually had to go through this fairly recently for myself. If I had some assumptions around what my revenue target should be, and I started kind of imagining, working backwards from, all right, if we were to build a company that could manage that level of clientele,
Right.
then what would that team look like? And then, what would have to happen for that to work based on what I currently have? And the funny thing is, when the numbers get bigger, the more personnel you have, the smaller slice of that pie that you get to keep as the owner.
Yes.
And I started realizing that, wait a second, I I can have a company like half this size and probably personally make about the same. And I can reach this other target much faster. I need far fewer people to do it. I can have a much leaner team, much less support, less just hassle overall. And it really isn't that hard of a target. compared to where we are, I need to roughly double.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to ask that question, because you can look at the number and be drawn to like the status that comes with, we crossed $1 million. Okay, why? You're getting taxed way harder. You're,
Right.
you're
Right.
there's
There's all sorts of
you might not
things.
need it.
Right. There's all sorts of reasons that that's a bad idea, and there's also all sorts of reasons that it's a good idea.
Sure,
And that really is the piece of understanding what is the driver. I know in your case, because you and I have talked enough, that you are a provider for the family, so your income is going to be an important driver of
yeah,
how much that you're able to take out of the business, because you're managing expenses and mortgage payments and food and all of those other things that are important. Um, if you were 40 years older than you are
sure,
now, and still doing something similar, that may no longer be the issue for you. You may be much more interested in having a business that is sellable. And
right.
so that may be a business where you need to get yourself so far out of it that um, no one actually knows much about RJ, and they don't really care if they ever talk to RJ.
You at a board meeting once a year.
Right, yeah, exactly, because it's no longer important. And so when
Right.
someone else buys you, the fact that you're no longer there, nobody cares. That's a very different business situation, and your operations need to look very, very different for those. It doesn't mean that one's right and one's wrong.
Absolutely.
Depends
And
it
the target can
depends on what you're
change.
really looking for. Yeah.
And the best part is the target can change.
Oh yeah,
Of
absolutely.
if your priorities change, then like just, I know in this time of my life, I've got a young daughter, who's coming up on 2.5. So it's really important that I have the next few years while she's young and spending a lot of time at home, all of her time at home, that I have time with her. When she was at school, I know that's go time, within a
Right.
certain set of parameters of, then that's nights, that's during the day, that's work time, that's time to build. In my 40s, 50s, 60s, priorities are going to be very different.
Absolutely.
So having that conversation of what is success now, not necessarily grand scheme, how will I know I've made it? Who cares? It's not a good measure of, what your neighbors think.
Right, because what your neighbors need is not necessarily what you need,
Exactly.
at any given point in time. And so really focusing on that to me is huge. And I think it gets, I'll say, swept under the carpet a little bit too much, because there's so often I think we have people making assumptions that, well, what
Yeah.
you really want is a seven-figure business. And it's like, maybe, maybe not.
Right. Yeah.
Or
Um,
an eight or an
so
eight-figure business or a nine-figure business.
right. Or my favorite thing on LinkedIn these days is, what if we can give you a completely booked out calendar? You want to have 50 sales calls a week? I'm like, that would be my nightmare. I absolutely do not want a jam-packed calendar of nothing but 20-minute meetings. Absolutely not.
Yeah,
But for some, that's what they want. I don't
yeah,
know.
exactly. And knowing what you want and why you want it,
Right.
like I said, to me, that's how we start really designing operations that support, so that the business works in the way that you want it to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So my final question to close this out: in the last 35 years of your experience as a coach, if you were to package the wisdom that you have attained and give that to someone in their first year or two in business as a coach, as a consultant, a small business owner, what would you want to share with them?
Well, that's like a super easy question. So many things come to mind, but I think the probably the most important thing that I would want to share is how important knowing what you want, not getting sucked into the social media vortex of this is what you're supposed to want, um, and being really comfortable that it is going to be a continual series of ups and downs. And like you were saying, that the target may move even in the short term. One of the things I talk about a lot now when we talk about setting goals is the goal is just a guideline for you. It is a target, because entrepreneurs, almost every entrepreneur is very visionary, and so the whole, squirrel thing, happens very, very easy. And so for me, it's okay if you're going to take a different path, but I want you to choose it with intention and not just wander off down a rabbit trail without having any real purpose
Yeah.
for it, right? But often the goal we think we want, we don't realize is not the goal that we want until we're partway there, until we're closer to it. And then we're like, oh yeah, this isn't what I thought this was, because if it's out there,
Right.
it's going to be hard to be able to determine that. And probably my biggest wisdom, kind of, that ties all this together, is that business it success in business is not a destination. It is the journey. And if you're going to, sacrifice something for 3 or 4 or 5 years to achieve this success, you've probably failed, because the journey really is where the success is. So try and make the journey as successful as possible, knowing that there's going to be some times that you have to work a little bit harder. There's going to be some times that things feel really, blah, and they're not optimal. It's not going to be sunshine and roses the entire journey. But if you think that so long as I get there, I'm going to be happy, and you're not at all happy between here and there, you're that you've probably failed. And quite honestly, you're probably not going to be happy when you get there either. That you really need to look at how can you make the journey successful, as opposed to the goal being the success. This is probably
I
the first time I've ever verbalized that. Did that make any sense at all, or was that
I
completely confusing?
no, I think I heard exactly what you're saying, of if, because it's so easy right now. If you're just getting started, there's so many different ways to enter into business. Before, I mean, 50 years ago is a little simpler. There were limited options.
Oh
It was
yeah.
usually going to be like a retail, restaurant, or like a consumables business, hospitality. Like, you didn't have unlimited options like you do now, where now you can get pulled into, doing all sorts of different things.
Oh yeah.
Business has just changed quite a bit.
And
And
you have access to the entire world like we never had
right,
before. Yeah.
right. You
I
you
mean,
don't
yeah,
need to
there's so many things
focus,
that are different. Yeah.
or it's much harder to focus on just one thing without worrying that there's some better opportunity. And just kind of hearing what you're saying of, make it, don't just chase the money, like, figure out what you need to support the life that you're after, and make sure you've got a vehicle that's going to support financially what you're trying to do. It's really hard to make it, if your profit margin is, $5 a sale and you're selling t-shirts, it's really hard to support a family of 4. It's doable, but it's really tough to do. Find a vehicle that's going to support the life you want, and enjoy the process, because ideally it's making you a better person as you go. You're learning more about yourself, you're developing, each stage is different. And more often than not, when people reach the pinnacle, the height of their career, they often just want to be back doing it again. When they were working
Oh,
out of a tiny cubicle office, or, out of their bedroom, and just enjoy the process more.
yeah.
You hear that from authors all the time. People who are, multimillionaires. Like, I just wish I was 20 again, and, just getting started and have all these ideas and looking forward to the rest of my life. Versus when you're 40 or 50 and you've done everything already, then, it's about the making it a game, and just try and enjoy playing it for as long as you can.
Yeah, and really that is where the success is, that you're having the success and getting some of the things that you need all along the way. And in some cases, it's going to be time. In some cases, it's going to be money. In some cases, it's going to be how you're impacting other people. There's all sorts of ways that success can look depending on who you are and where you are in your stage, and what's going on. But that big goal and I'm going to give up everything to be able to do it, usually isn't worth it. I mean, I loved how you said, my daughter is home. There's going to be a point that she's going to go off to school, but while she's here, I want to have access. And I noticed a post, I think it was last week or the week before, where you took an afternoon off so that you guys could go play on the slide. You know, that you're enjoying the process as you're going along and realizing where you could have worked those hours and probably made another few $100,
Mhm.
for it, but saying, nope, that's not what I've got. Enough of the bucks. I need to also have the time, right? And figuring what that balance is. There may be a point that you're like, nope, we're going to put more money away because that's what I need. There may be a point that's like, nope, I want more time, because that's what I need. But being really aware of that and saying, I'm going to try and create as much of that success as I can along the way. And like I said, it's almost never a perfect balance that I've got it, but being aware of it and working toward it.
Yeah, absolutely. Gwen, thank you so much for coming on. I will put all of Gwen's details down in the description, in the show notes, wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening. Go check her out. She's fantastic, and I'm very grateful to have had her on the show.
I am
So
so glad. No surprise. It was a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on the show. I really appreciated it, RJ.
it was my pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of CEOs on Video. I hope you got something valuable from it. If you liked this episode of CEOs on Video, be sure to let us know by giving us a follow. Leave us a rating on Apple Music. It would mean the world to us. So let us know what you like, what you didn't, and if there's anything that we can do to help you, be sure to reach out. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on the next one.